This is a 40-year-old woman named Michelle, and her deaf blindness is her biggest challenge in life. All she sees is black, and all she can hear is nothing. Fortunately, Michelle had a special teacher who fought a battle against fate to bring light to her world. However, that teacher disappeared from her life without a trace. One Sunday morning, Michelle walks to the church. She's been going there for 12 years to pray that she reunites with her teacher and that she nails her university tests. Just then, the snow falls, and Michelle rejoices when she feels it on her hands. She feels that God will answer her prayers and reunite her with her teacher. Shortly after, Michelle is coming back home with her younger sister Sarah when she finds a man sitting on the fountain. Sarah tells her sister to wait and goes to see who that man is. To her surprise and joy, the man turns out to be Michelle's long-missing teacher, Debraj. Sarah is excited and rushes to tell Michelle, who then hurries out of the car to see Debraj. However, Debraj doesn't recognize her and doesn't remember anything. Michelle and Sarah take him to a hospital where the doctor breaks the horrible news that Debraj has Alzheimer's. He can't remember who he is or where he is. Worst of all, he doesn't know how to speak, and his condition is incurable. While the doctor talks to Michelle's mother, Kathy, Michelle tries to help Debraj read, but fails. Observing this, the doctor informs Kathy that science does not believe in miracles, to which Kathy responds that nothing is impossible. She believes that Michelle can help Debraj the same way he helped Michelle when she was little, as Michelle helps Debraj to remember. She recalls the time when she was 2. It was the time when her father, Paul, told Kathy that Michelle is blind and deaf. This deeply devastates Kathy. She screams in pain, knowing her daughter won't see or hear. Michelle grows up to be a wild and unruly 8-year-old kid. One day, she accidentally knocks over the lit candles on the dining table, setting it on fire. Her parents save her in time, but after the incident, Paul becomes extremely furious with her. He decides to send Michelle to a mental institution. Hearing this disappoints Kathy, and a heated argument ensues between the couple. Just then, Michelle violently knocks her baby sister Sarah off the crib and puts the baby doll in her place. Paul loses it and beats Michelle. But Kathy saves her daughter and scolds Paul. She reminds him that Michelle is suffering in her own world of darkness. This saddens Paul and makes him realize what he's just done to his daughter. Not long after, the couple decides to bring a special teacher to help their daughter. They write a letter to Debraj. Aside from being a special teacher for the deaf-blind, Debraj is an alcoholic, and he also sees himself as an eccentric magician. However, he's dedicated to his job and makes it his life's mission to help the poor Michelle. The next day, Debraj visits Paul and Kathy and gets to know Michelle, who's hiding under her bed. After Debraj coaxes her out, Michelle feels his hand and recognizes him as someone new. Michelle then caresses Debraj's face and notices the sunglasses, which are something new to her. Debraj puts his sunglasses on Michelle before he notices the bell tied to her waist to clue her parents about where she is whenever she hides. This angers Debraj. He takes the bell off Michelle's waist and scolds Paul for this. He reminds him that his daughter is a human, not a cow. Paul calmly replies that it is Debraj's job to make her human. Before an argument can go on between the two men, Kathy interrupts them and invites Debraj to lunch. At lunch, Paul says grace, while Michelle naughtily runs around the table. She eats from everybody's plates with her hand. She's about to eat from Debraj's plate, but Debraj stops her. When Michelle resists, Paul orders Debraj to leave his daughter. When Debraj says no, Paul tells him he's a paid servant in his house and orders him to obey. But Debraj reminds Paul he's a teacher and tells him to leave the room along with his wife. Grudgingly, Paul leaves the room along with Kathy and the guest Martha, while Michelle is all alone with Debraj. He tries to teach her how to eat with the spoon like an ordinary human, but Michelle doesn't obey him and slaps him. After slapping her back, Debraj forces her to sit down and spoon feeds her, but Michelle won't budge and spits the rice all over Debraj's face. Debraj snaps and splashes the water on her face. Surprisingly, that calms down Michelle, and finally she obeys Debraj and eats with the spoon for the first time in her life. Watching this from the outside, Kathy rejoices and thanks the Lord, seeing Michelle learn something new for the first time. However, Paul felt insulted in his own home when Debra had him go out of the dining room. He also doesn't like Debraj's harsh way of teaching. That's why Paul fires Debraj. He tells him to leave the next morning, but Debraj says no and calmly tries to dissuade him. However, Paul insists that Debraj leaves next morning. The next morning, Paul is going away on a business trip for the next 20 days. He thinks Debraj left the house, so he promises Kathy to talk about what to do with Michelle when he returns. Kathy is walking back in when she finds the servants moving Paul's portraits out of his study. She orders them to stop, but is surprised when she sees that Debraj hasn't left yet. He wants to use Paul's study to teach Michelle in isolation for the next 20 days. Kathy says no, but Debraj reminds her he is her last hope. He also warns her if he leaves today, she'll end up sending her daughter to a mental institution. Kathy firmly says that she won't send Michelle to a mental institution as long as she's alive. Debraj replies that his mother said the same thing about his disabled sister, but surprisingly, she ended up sending her to a mental institution. Debraj then reminds Kathy that Michelle is just deaf and blind, not retarded. That's why he asks Kathy for her trust and for 20 days to teach Michelle without pay before Paul returns. Hearing this, Kathy considers it a deal and says yes. On day 1, Kathy takes her daughter to Debraj at Paul's study, where he tells Kathy to leave. Just then, Michelle trips. She stands back up and runs to her mother, but bumps into Debraj, who yells at Kathy to leave. Debraj then locks the door, and Kathy panics, asking for her mother. She wildly bangs on the door and windows. Eventually, she tires and ends up sleeping on the floor. Debraj wakes her up and decides to teach her the alphabet and some English words, so he brings a cake and has Michelle smell it. He then tells her this is a cake, but Michelle gets hungry and decides to eat it. Debraj stops her and tries to get her to pronounce the word cake, but Michelle bites his hand.
Say cake, cake on that.
Just then, the electricity goes off. Debraj panics and calls Kathy to bring some light, while Michelle gobbles up the cake. Kathy walks in to find Debraj lying on the ground after he bumped into the wall. She also sees her daughter eating the cake. Amused at this sight, she jokingly remarks that he lost to Michelle by knockout. Debraj agrees, but he reminds her this is still round 1. He still has 19 rounds left. On day 2, Debraj tries to get Michelle to touch the water in the fountain to teach her what water is. However, Michelle is afraid of touching water. Kathy tells Debraj about it, but Debraj assures her he'll rid Michelle of this fear. Debraj loses himself in talking to Kathy and lets go of Michelle's hand. Michelle takes advantage and runs off, causing Kathy to laugh. Debraj chases her in the garden, but Michelle puts her hand on a cactus and screams in pain afterward.
Watch it! Watch out! Oh.
Shortly after, Debraj heals her hand, and Kathy notices Michelle shaking his hand. As the days go by, Debraj teaches her the names of the objects around her. He teaches about the bird, ball, and napkin. Still, Michelle can't pronounce the words. On day 19, Kathy tells Debraj his time is up, but Debraj still wants to get his job done. He tells Kathy he still has a long way to go. He also reminds her he still has 1 day left. Kathy decides to let him stay and reminds him he has until sunrise. Debraj happily says yes and closes the door before going back to teaching Michelle. Just then, Kathy peeks through the glass and sees Michelle eating her breakfast using a spoon all by herself. Seeing her kid acting like that for the first time, Kathy joyfully tears up and thanks Debraj for turning her wild daughter into a fine young lady. The sunrise of day 20 comes, and Debraj's time is up. Still, Debraj is trying to teach Michelle more words, but Kathy walks in to take her daughter back. Debraj wants to spend more time with Michelle, but stops after seeing that Paul has returned. With a stern look, Paul tells Debraj to leave. Debraj can't do anything about it, so he packs his stuff. He's on his way out, but he sees Michelle grabbing the food with her hand and rudely throwing it at the maid, Mrs. Gomes.
No!
He rushes downstairs and stops her, but Michelle becomes wild again and splashes water on Debraj's face. Enraged, Debraj drags Michelle outside to teach her what water is, so he places her into the fountain, soaking her in the water. Debraj then tells Michelle that this is water. He tries having her pronounce the word, but she doesn't. Frustrated, Debraj then throws her into the water. He starts thinking his harsh teaching methods aren't working anymore. Just then, a miracle happens. Michelle grabs Debraj's hand and pronounces the word water. Debraj rejoices at seeing Michelle pronounce her first word, but he rejoices more when Michelle spells the word with her hand. Debraj excitedly calls Kathy to come. Michelle rushes out of the fountain, but she trips and feels the grass. Debraj traces the letters of the word grass on her forearm, and Michelle correctly spells the word with her hand. Over the moon, Debraj exclaims Kathy's name,
Mrs. Magdalene!
telling her to come see her daughter. The couple comes to learn that their daughter pronounced her very first word. Debraj tells Michelle to say the word mother. Much to his joy, Michelle faces her mother and does so. Filled with joy, Kathy hugs her daughter. Kathy then has Michelle pronounce the word papa. This thrills her parents, who warmly hug her. Their deaf-blind daughter recognizes them for the first time in her life. Michelle then goes to Debraj. He puts her hand on his lips and pronounces the word teacher. Michelle does so, and Debraj tears up in joy. At this point, the couple decides to keep Debraj because his teaching paid off. Years later, Paul and Kathy throw a party at their home. While the singer sings a song, the adult Michelle gets up on stage and puts her hands on the singer's mouth. She then says the lyrics with her hand and dances to the music, though she can't hear it. This is something the guests marvel at. One of those guests is Debraj's friend, Principal Fernandez. Debraj asks Fernandez to help Michelle gain admission into the prestigious university he runs. Fernandez says this is impossible since Michelle won't understand anything in the lectures. Debraj tells him he'll attend the lectures to translate everything for her and help her study. Michelle then approaches them, and Debraj introduces her to Fernandez. Michelle tells him about her wish to study arts, and Fernandez says he'll do his best to get her an interview with the admissions board. Fortunately for Michelle, the admissions board agrees to interview her.
We're ready, sir.
Even though this university is for normal students without disabilities, Michelle wants to enroll. Before the interview starts, the professors tell Debraj to step aside and bring in a woman named Mrs. Nair to translate for Kathy. The interview begins with the professors asking Michelle some questions to test her general knowledge. At first, Michelle nails every question, but when the professors ask her a tougher question, she pauses for a moment. An anxious Debraj is breathlessly waiting for her reply when Michelle gives a clever answer, astonishing Mrs. Nair. One of the professors then asks a philosophical question about what knowledge is. Once again, Michelle nails it and gives an intelligent answer, which impresses the board members who applaud her for the reply and accept her as a new student. Debraj tears up in joy and is proud of Michelle, the student he has been teaching for 12 years. Following this, Michelle talks to her parents about how she aced the interview. While the parents are proud of Michelle, her sister Sarah grows jealous because of the huge attention Michelle gets. She excuses herself to go to her room and doesn't congratulate her sister for her success. Debraj then stops by to gift Michelle a white cane for her success at the interview. Michelle rejects it and says she doesn't want to be dependent, to which Debraj replies that this cane will help her gain independence. The semester starts, and Michelle attends her lectures with Debraj as her translator. As the days go by, Michelle proves herself to be an exceptional student inside the lecture room. She also becomes popular with her peers. To help Michelle study, Debraj reads her the books and translates them for her. One day, they are reading in the park when suddenly the snow falls. Michelle feels it for the first time in her life and rejoices, so she starts dancing along with Debraj. Even though Michelle is clever, she is slow on the typing machine. This worries Debraj, who asks her how she'll pass her exams if she's slow. Debraj's worry becomes true when Michelle fails all her final tests. Surprisingly, the two don't take this failure to heart and laugh it off. Even more surprising, they celebrate and start dancing. After all, they will keep trying until Michelle passes her tests. Time goes by, and once again, Michelle fails her tests. Debraj calls Kathy and tells her about this, disappointing her. But he assures her that failure is the first step to success. He also adds that he's getting old before he hangs up. Shortly after, Kathy gets a call, and this time it is the homesick Michelle on the line. With her broken English, Michelle tells Kathy she's had enough of these exams and wants to come home. This leaves Kathy in tears as she never heard her daughter talk like this. Not long after, Principal Fernandez calls DeBrage to his office and notes that Michelle has been taking the same classes for 2 years. For this reason, Fernandez decides to support Michelle in her academic journey and gives DeBrage books for Michelle printed in Braille. DeBrage thanks Fernandez for his help and is about to leave when suddenly he forgets how to walk out of this office. As he asks how to get out, the weirded out Fernandez points at the door. This marks the start of DeBrage's Alzheimer's. Fernandez asks DeBrage if he is all right, but DeBrage just walks out without saying a word. In year 3, Michelle is growing older and develops feelings for DeBrage, but he reminds her to maintain her boundaries as a student and focus on studying. Later, Michelle does her final exams for the 3rd time, but she fails because she's slow on the typing machine. This pisses off DeBrage. DeBrage then takes Michelle home, where he tells Kathy about Michelle's 3rd failure because of her slow typing. As for Michelle, she despairs and decides to drop out. However, DeBrage is a man of true grit. He tells the disheartened Michelle that she will never quit college as long as he's alive. Kathy asks DeBrage to give Michelle a break, but DeBrage responds that he didn't spend over a decade and a half of his life teaching Michelle just for her to give up and drop out of university. DeBrage urges Michelle not to give up, but Michelle is fed up. She takes her frustration out on her books when DeBrage snaps and slaps her. This causes Michelle to snap and type 62 words in less than 2 minutes, saying that her world is black. DeBrage sees this as a big improvement. He also sees it as a reason to celebrate and eat ice cream now that Michelle learned from her 3rd failure. Immediately afterward, DeBrage is about to buy ice cream when suddenly his Alzheimer's kicks in, causing him to forget what he wanted to buy in the first place. Luckily, the ice cream man takes the hint and gives DeBrage 2 ice creams. DeBrage leaves with the ice creams but forgets to take the change. Even more surprising, he goes home and forgets about Michelle. During this time, Michelle misses him and gets worried. She wanders around and looks for him, but a car almost runs her over, alarming the passers-by. Soon after, Principal Fernandez visits DeBrage, but DeBrage doesn't recognize him. After reminding DeBrage who he is, Fernandez asks DeBrage about Michelle. DeBrage calls for Michelle, but Fernandez reminds him that Michelle is deaf and is not home. She's standing next to Fernandez, who has just found her in the street. As DeBrage comes to his senses and realizes his mistake, Fernandez advises him to get some help to treat his memory issues. Not long after, DeBrage says sorry to Michelle, and Michelle forgives him with an open heart. Days later, Sarah is engaged. To celebrate, the family invites their soon-to-be in-laws to dinner, where Sarah makes a toast. She talks about her childhood. Surprisingly, she goes on a rant about how Michelle got all of her parents' love and attention, while DeBrage translates to Michelle. Hearing her sister's speech, Michelle gets upset and loses it. She tells Sarah to shut up, but DeBrage calms her down and reads a congratulations speech Michelle wrote. In this speech, Michelle thanks Sarah for taking care of her when she was little. Michelle also tells Sarah she wants to be her bridesmaid at the wedding. This soothes Sarah and makes her realize how much Michelle loves her. Later, the wedding takes place. Everybody seems happy, except for Michelle. She starts craving love and hoping for a man to enter her life. This feeling drives her into going to DeBrage's home later, where she asks him if he loves her. At first, DeBrage sympathizes with her and assures her that she'll find love one day. However, Michelle grows impatient and has DeBrage touch her inappropriately, causing him to lose respect for himself as a teacher. The next day, DeBrage writes Michelle a letter and tells her he's leaving her. At this point, DeBrage disappears from Michelle's life, and Michelle has to continue her academic journey on her own. It was only after 12 years that Michelle finally found DeBrage sitting on the fountain. Mr. DeBrage is having a difficult time finding his bed in the hospital now that Alzheimer's has tightened its grip on his memory. Michelle visits to tell him about her graduation, but she finds him chained to his bed like an animal. Enraged, Michelle removes the chain and walks out with it. Days later, Michelle graduates after failing countless times, and Fernandez has her deliver a speech. Everybody gives her a big round of applause, while Paul proudly says that this is his daughter, while Kathy translates. Michelle speaks about her multiple failures that eventually led to her success. Michelle then states to her fellow graduates that what they learned in 20 years, she learned in 40. She then gives a big shout out to Debraj, who was with her every step of the way. After all, he accepted her despite her shortcomings and taught her to never give up. She then concludes and states that she wants Debraj to be the first to see her in the black graduation gown. Following this, Michelle visits Debraj in the hospital wearing her graduation gown. When Debraj approaches Michelle and sees the gown, a miracle happens. He regains bits of his memory and recognizes Michelle. What's more miraculous is that he realizes that she finally graduated and succeeded. This makes Debraj proud and leaves him in tears. He even starts dancing. He then takes Michelle's hand, and the two feel the raindrops on their hands. Debraj then puts Michelle's hand on his lips and pronounces the word water. He has just learned the very first word he ever taught Michelle, leaving her in awe. The two then enjoy the silence of the moment and watch the rain. Days later, Michelle marches to the church along with a crowd of people holding lit candles. Debraj has passed away, but Michelle will always remember him as the greatest teacher who lived and taught her this one golden rule: with true grit and willpower, nothing is impossible.